Chapter 5. As the sun began to set, I slipped through a side gate into the spaceport square. The old city was starting to come alive as the night fell, with men and women of all kinds emerging from their pebble houses and wandering the moonlit streets. I knew that no one would pay me any attention, mistaking me for a dry-town vagabond who was simply curious about the strangers from beyond the stars before returning to where I belonged. I made my way down a dark alley, feeling at home in the Igam despite having only seen its daytime face for the past 6 years as a trantor. I wondered if there were even a handful of earthlings in the old town tonight. I caught a glimpse of one in the bazaar, stumbling around drunk and covered in grime. They were the ones who wandered aimlessly between worlds, belonging nowhere. I almost became one of them. I continued up the hill, where the streets rose higher. I turned around and saw the bright, illuminated spaceport below me, with the skyscraper looming like an alien shadow in the red-violet moonlight. I ignored them and kept walking. At the edge of the Thieves' Market, I stopped outside a wine shop that welcomed dry-towners. A golden, non-human child muttered something as she ran past me in the street, and I froze with stage fright. Had my Shainsa dialect become rusty? Spies were not tolerated on Coruscant, and a mile away from the spaceport, I might as well have been on one of those moons. There were no spaceport guards behind me now. Someone might remember the story of an earthling with a scarred face who went to Shainsa in disguise. I shrugged my shirt cloak around my shoulders, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. I remembered that Lyric was waiting for me, not behind this door, but at the end of the trail, behind another door, somewhere. We had a saying in Shainsa, "A trail with no beginning has no end." I stopped thinking about Julie, Rindy, the Trantor Empire, or what Lyric, who knew too many of Terra's secrets, might do if he turned renegade. I absent-mindedly stroked the ridge of scar tissue along my mouth, thinking only of Lyric, an unsettled blood feud, and my revenge. Red lamps burned inside the wine shop, where men lounged on shabby couches. I tripped over one of them, found an empty spot, and sank down, automatically arranging myself in the sprawl of dry-towners indoors. In public, they stood rigid and formal, even when eating and drinking. Among themselves, anything less than a loose-limbed sprawl was considered insulting watchfulness. Only a man who feared secret murder kept himself on guard. A girl with tangled hair approached me. Her hands were unchained, meaning she was of the lowest class and not worth safeguarding. Her fur smock was shabby and dirty. I sent her to get wine. When it arrived, it was surprisingly good, the sweet and treacherous wine of Ardcaran. I sipped it slowly, looking around. If a caravan was leaving for Shainsa tomorrow, it would be known here. A word dropped that I was returning there would bring me an invitation to travel with them, as was custom. When I sent the woman for wine a second time, a man on a nearby couch got up and walked over to me. He was taller than most dry-towners, and there was something vaguely familiar about him. He wasn't a riffraff of the Yigam either, as his shirt-cloak was made of rich silk interwoven with metallic threads and crusted with heavy embroideries. The handle of his blade was crafted from a single green gem. He stood over me, silent for a moment before speaking. "I remember voices, but your face escapes me. Do I owe you a debt?" He spoke in the melodic language of Shainsa, while I had spoken in a different tongue to the girl. I gestured for him to sit, as is customary on Coruscant. There, polite conversation requires a series of indirect phrases, and a direct answer is seen as foolish. "Would you like a drink?" I offered. "You joined me uninvited," he replied, summoning the girl with wild hair. "Bring us something better than this swill." With that, I recognized him as the same man who had caused trouble in the spaceport cafe and fled when the girl with the Nebran symbol confronted him. But in the dim light, he did not recognize me. I moved into the bright red light, hoping to keep my identity concealed. If he did not recognize me as the Trantor from the previous night, it was unlikely that anyone else would. He stared at me for a moment, but then shrugged and poured wine from the bottle he had ordered. After 3 drinks, I learned his name was Kirill, and he traded in wire and fine steel tools in non-human towns. I had given him the name Raskar. He asked, "Are you planning to return to Shainsa?" I hesitated, wary of a trap, but the question seemed harmless. I replied, "How long have you been in Yigam?" "Several weeks," he he said, taking another sip of wine. "I wasn't trading. I was searching for a family member." "Did you find them?" I asked. "Her," Kirill spat ceremoniously. "No, I didn't find her. What brings you to Shainsa?" I chuckled briefly. "As a matter of fact, I'm also searching for a family member." He narrowed his eyes, suspecting me of mockery, but personal privacy is a strict convention in the dry towns. He did not ask further questions. "I could use an extra hand to handle the loads," Kirill said. "Are you good with pack animals? If so, you're welcome to travel with my caravan." I agreed, but then remembered that Julie and Lyric were likely known in Shainsa. "Do you know a trader who goes by Archer?" Kirill started, his eyes moving over my scars. Then a satisfied glimmer briefly appeared before reserve took over, concealing his true emotions. "No," he lied, standing up. "We leave at first light. Have your gear ready." He tossed a stone with his name and the ideographs of Shainsa at me. "You can sleep with the caravan if you want." The Yigam was behind us, and Kirill's caravan was stationed in a field beyond the furthest gates. A group of men were busy loading pack animals, mostly horses from Darkover. I asked the first person I saw for Quinn, and he pointed out a burly man in a shiny red shirt cloak who was scolding one of the young men for not properly saddling his horse. Quinn had a special talent for cursing in Shainsa, and I was impressed by his skill. When he finally stopped to catch his breath, I handed him Kirill's token. In the firelight, I saw that he was the same man who had tried to rough me up in the spaceport cafe. Quinn barely glanced at the token before tossing it back and instructing me to load my personal gear onto one of the pack horses. He then ordered me to show the young man how to fasten a pack strap using a particularly vulgar insult in Shainsa. I took the strap and guided it through the saddle loop, and Quinn pointed out a pile of boxes and crates for me to help load. We were to leave the city by daybreak. Kirill arrived at dawn, and we set off on our journey. Despite Quinn's harsh demeanor, the caravan was well managed, and the men were capable and efficient. They were mostly young dry-towners who spent their evenings gambling silently around the fire. 3 days into our journey, I began to worry about Quinn. It was unfortunate that all 3 of the men from the spaceport cafe were in Kirill's caravan. Kirill had not recognized me, and the second man was unlikely to have paid me any attention. But Quinn was different. He was my age, and his sharp eyes made me uneasy. He watched me closely and asked direct questions that went beyond dry-town manners. I considered the possibility that I might have to kill him before we reached Shainsa. We crossed the foothills and began our ascent into the mountains. In the beginning, I struggled to catch my breath as we ascended to higher altitudes. However, my body soon adjusted, and I fell into the routine of our journey. The trade city's glow in the distance faded with each passing day as we climbed higher and higher along treacherous trails. The dry-towners, who hailed from the parched sea-bottom lands, suffered from the intense sun at these altitudes. But having grown up under Terra's scorching sun, even Coruscant's red sun did not bother me. This made Quinn suspicious of me. As we crossed the passes and descended through thick forests, we entered non-human territory. We raced against the ghost wind, avoiding the land around Charon and the woods inhabited by the cannibalistic bird-like Yarmen. We later passed through forests of indigo trees and greyish-purple brushwood, where the catmen's howls echoed at night. We set up guards around the caravan at night, wary of the strange noises and smells that filled the darkness. One night, while on guard with Quinn, I heard a rustle at the edge of the forest. I turned to speak to him and saw him slipping away towards the clearing's outskirts. I followed him and saw the flicker of lights beyond the trees. He was signaling someone. I drew my skein and tackled him to the ground. We grappled, and I managed to grip his wrist to prevent him from harming me. I demanded to know who he was signaling, warning him not to alert the entire camp. In the light of the fallen lantern, Quinn looked almost inhuman with his snarling lips. He struggled with the knife for a moment before dropping it. "Let me stand up," he demanded. I complied and kicked the knife towards him. "Put that away! What were you thinking, trying to attract the catmen to us?" He appeared taken aback for a moment before his face hardened, and he responded angrily, "Can't a man leave the camp without being attacked?" I glared at him, but realized that I had no evidence to support my suspicion. He could have been answering the call of nature, and the movement of the lantern could have been accidental. If someone had attacked me from behind, I might have pulled out a knife too. So I simply warned him, "Don't do it again. We're all too nervous." There were no other incidents that night or the next. On the third night, while I was lying by the fire wrapped in my shirt, cloak, and blanket, I saw Quinn sneak out of his bedroll and disappear into the darkness. A moment later, there was a glimmer in the distance. Before I could muster the courage to confront him, he returned and crawled back into his blankets, checking to make sure that the other men were still asleep. At the next camp, Carol approached me. "Have you heard anything strange lately? I have a feeling that we're being followed. We'll be out of these woods by tomorrow, and after that, it's a clear path to Shainsa. If anything is going to happen, it will be tonight." I considered telling him about Quinn's signals, but decided against it. I had my own business to attend to in Shainsa, and didn't want to get involved in someone else's private affairs. Carol then instructed me, "I'm putting you and Quinn on watch again. The older men doze off, and the younger ones daydream or fool around. That's fine most of the time, but I need someone who will stay alert tonight. Have you met Quinn before this?" "No, I haven't." "Strange. I had the impression." He trailed off, then turned away. "Don't hesitate to wake the camp if there's any disturbance. It's better to have a false alarm than to be caught off guard by an ambush. We all have knives, but I don't think anyone in the camp has a shocker, let alone a gun. Do you have one by any chance?" After the men had gone to sleep, Quinn patrolled the camp and stopped beside me for a moment, gesturing towards the rustling forest. "What's happening in there?" "Who knows? Maybe the cat men are on the prowl, thinking that the horses would make a good meal, or maybe they're after us." "Do you think we'll have to fight?" "I don't know." He studied me for a moment before speaking in Trantor Standard. "And if we do?" "We'll fight," I responded before realizing that I had answered in the same language. He grinned, revealing teeth that had been filed to a point. "I thought so." I grabbed his shoulder and demanded, "What are you going to do about it?" "It depends on you," he replied, "and what you want in Shainsa." "Tell me the truth," the man demanded, not giving me a chance to respond. "You know who Kirill is, don't you?" "He's a trader," I replied, "who pays my wages and minds his own business." I took a step back, my hand on my weapon, ready for any sudden movements. However, he didn't make any aggressive motions. "Kirill told me you've been asking about Lyric Archer," he said. "Clever, but I could have told you that he's never laid eyes on Lyric." He stopped speaking, hearing a noise in the forest, a long, eerie howl. I muttered, "If you've brought them down on us." He shook his head urgently. "I had to take that chance to get word to the others, but it won't work. Where's the girl?" I barely heard him, as I heard twigs snapping and silent footsteps approaching. I turned to yell for the camp to awaken, but Quinn grabbed me hard, saying insistently, "Quick! Where's the girl? Go back and tell her it won't work. If Kirill suspected—" He never finished his sentence. Another eerie howl sounded, and suddenly the night was filled with crouching forms that came down on us like a whirlwind. I shouted madly as the camp came alive with men struggling out of blankets, fighting for their lives. I ran hard, still shouting, for the enclosure where we had tied the horses. A catman, slim and black-furred, was crouched and cutting the hobble strings of the nearest animal. I hurled myself at him, and he exploded, clawing and raking my shoulder with talons that ripped through my clothing like paper. I whipped out my weapon and slashed upward. The talons contracted in my shoulder, and I gasped with pain. Then the creature howled and fell away, clawing at the air. It twitched and lay still. 4 shots in rapid succession cracked in the clearing. Despite Kirill's claims, someone must have had a pistol. I heard one of the cat things wail, a hoarse, dying rattle. Something dark clawed my arm, and I slashed with my knife, going down as another set of talons fastened in my back. I rolled and clutched, managing to get the creature's forelimbs wedged under my elbow and my knee in its spine. I heaved, bending it backward until it screamed a high wail. Then I felt the spine snap, and the dead thing mewled once, just air escaping from its collapsing lungs, before sliding limp from my thigh. Erect, it had not been over 4 feet tall, and in the light of the dying fire, it might have been a dead lynx. "Raskar!" I heard a gasp, a groan. I whirled and saw Kirill go down, struggling, drowning in 6 or more of the fierce half-humans. I leaped at the smother of bodies, ripping one away with a stranglehold and slashing at its throat. They were easy to kill. I heard a high, urgent scream in their mewing tongue. Then the black-furred things seemed to melt into the forest as silently as they had come. Kirill, dazed, his forehead running blood and his arms slashed to the bone, was sitting on the ground, still stunned. Somebody had to take charge. I bellowed, "Lights! Get lights!" "They won't return if we have enough light," I heard someone say. "They can only see well in the dark." With that, someone stirred the fire, and it blazed up as they piled on dead branches. I roughly commanded one of the kids to fill every lantern he could find and get them burning. 4 of the dead things were lying in the clearing, and the youngster I had helped loading horses the first day gazed down at one of the catmen, half disemboweled by somebody's skein, and suddenly bolted for the bushes, where I heard him retching. I set the others with stronger stomachs to dragging the bodies away from the clearing, and went back to see how badly Kirill was hurt. He had a rip in his arm, and his face was covered with blood from a shallow scalp wound, but he insisted on getting up to inspect the hurts of the others. There was no one without a claw wound in leg or back or shoulder, but none were serious, and we were all feeling fairly cheerful when someone demanded, "Where's Quinn?" He didn't seem to be anywhere. Kirill, staggering slightly, insisted on searching, but I felt we wouldn't find him. "He probably went off with his friends," I snorted, and told about the signaling. Kirill looked grave. "You should have told me," he began, but shouts from the far end of the clearing sent us racing there. We nearly stumbled over a single, solitary, motionless form, outstretched and lifeless, blind eyes staring upward at the moons. It was Quinn, and his throat had been torn completely out.